The Dutch are known for being one of the best shipbuilders in the world. The Netherlands has always had a huge interest in maritime trade and exploring new lands. It is because of this that the Netherlands was able to grow into a massive global empire spanning almost every single continent, including Antarctica. However, the Netherlands isn't known only for their amazing ships, but also for being a powerhouse in the field of space exploration. The Netherlands has sent more satellites into space than any other nation in Europe and are currently working on some of the most advanced space technology in the world. But what could these two have in common? How does an old European nation with a rich history in maritime exploration and trade become such a powerhouse in the aerospace industry? And how did they manage to build some of the largest spaceships ever built by man? How does all of this relate to the Dutch East India Company? And what can we learn from all of this? Before I get into this video, I would just like to say that this idea came to me while studying for my final exams. As such, this video is rather different from my normal style of videos. There may be less action and more focus on things such as the history of the Dutch and their impact on today's society. Nevertheless, I hope that you enjoy the video regardless. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. As many of you already know, the VOC or the Dutch East India Company was one of the first and largest navies ever assembled by man. It consisted of over 4,000 ships and employed over 150,000 men during its peak. Its purpose was simple: to explore and conquer new lands beyond Europe. At least, that's what it was called. The real reason was that the Dutch wanted to find spices. For centuries, the Dutch were willing to sail around the entire world to get exotic spices that would preserve food, increase its flavor, and allow them to last longer on their voyages. This led the Dutch to start trading with multiple nations across the world, such as Indonesia, China, and Japan. The Dutch traded with literally everyone. Because of this, the Dutch were willing to send out entire fleets of ships to find new lands and trade routes to said lands. For example, in 1601, the Dutch sent out an entire fleet consisting of 3 ships and over 200 men to explore and potentially settle New Zealand. They were led by a man named Abel Tasman, who became the first European to sight New Zealand and the first to explore both Tasmania and New Zealand. He was also the first European to circumnavigate the entire globe. All this shows us that the Dutch were extremely willing to explore new lands. They were willing to risk their lives and send out massive fleets of ships to find and trade with new lands. In fact, the Dutch even settled parts of Africa, present-day South Africa. When the Dutch started trading with Asia, they soon realized that halfway through their journey, their sailors needed somewhere to rest. The Dutch settled down in the Cape of Good Hope and established a refreshment station where they would stay for a couple of days before continuing on to India. This goes to show once again how far the Dutch were willing to go to ensure that they could continue trading with Asia. The Dutch East India Company had nearly complete control of the spice trade, and because of this, the Dutch became incredibly wealthy. In fact, the Dutch were so wealthy that they were able to fund their own explorers and scientists, allowing them to advance their knowledge in fields such as astronomy and mathematics. It was because of this that the Dutch were able to start building some of the largest spaceships ever built by man. You see, when the Dutch East India Company was formed, the main competitors of the Dutch were the Portuguese. Over time, the Dutch began to realize that they needed larger and larger ships in order to compete with the Portuguese. After all, if the Dutch couldn't compete with the Portuguese in terms of size, then they wouldn't be able to compete at all. The Dutch needed to build ships that were not only faster, but also larger. This led to the construction of the first Dutch East Indiamen, which were some of the largest ships ever built at the time. These ships were not only large, but very advanced for their time. They featured things such as watertight compartments, which allowed them to float even if they were damaged, as well as innovations in rigging and sail design that allowed them to catch more wind and travel faster. One of the most famous Dutch East Indiamen was the Amsterdam, which was the largest ship in the world when it was built. It was 170 feet long and 48 feet wide, and was able to carry a crew of over 500 men and a cargo capacity of over 1,000 tons. Imagine sailing in something like this. The Amsterdam was able to sail from the Netherlands to the East Indies in just 17 days, which was unheard of at the time. In fact, the Dutch were able to use their new ships to dominate the spice trade and become one of the most powerful nations in the world. The Dutch East India Company was able to conquer entire islands and rule over them like kings. For example, the Dutch were able to conquer the island of Java and establish a colony there, which would become the center of the spice trade. The Dutch were so powerful that they were even able to fight off the British and Portuguese who tried to take over their spice trade. The Dutch ships were so important to their empire that they even built docks and shipyards all over the world in order to repair and maintain their ships. For example, they built a shipyard in the Cape of Good Hope in order to repair their ships that were damaged on their way to Asia. The Dutch were so obsessed with shipbuilding that they were able to build some of the largest spaceships ever built by man. In fact, the Dutch were so obsessed with shipbuilding that they were able to build some of the largest spaceships ever built by man. As the years went on, the Dutch continued to innovate and build new types of ships. They built ships that were faster, larger, and more durable. The Dutch were able to build ships that could travel around the entire world without needing to stop for repairs. The Dutch were so skilled at shipbuilding that they were able to build ships that were used by other nations. For example, the Dutch built ships for the British and Portuguese, who were their rivals. The Dutch were so good at shipbuilding that they were able to build ships for both sides of World War II. The Dutch built ships for the Germans as well as the Allies. The Dutch were so good at shipbuilding that they were able to build some of the largest spaceships ever built by man. The Dutch were able to build ships that were used by other nations. The Dutch built ships for the British and Portuguese, who were their rivals. The Dutch were so good at shipbuilding that they were able to build ships for both sides of World War II. The Dutch built ships for the Germans as well as the Allies. So why were the Dutch so good at building ships? Well, it's because they had to be. You see, the Dutch were a small nation and didn't have a large army or navy. As such, they needed to be able to defend themselves with what they had. The Dutch were able to use their skills in shipbuilding to create ships that were able to defend themselves against much larger nations. The Dutch were also able to use their skills in shipbuilding to create ships that were able to transport goods and people around the world. This allowed the Dutch to become one of the most powerful nations in the world. So why is this important to us today? Well, it's because the Dutch are still one of the best shipbuilders in the world. The Dutch are still one of the best shipbuilders in the world because they have always been willing to innovate and push the boundaries of what is possible. The Dutch are also willing to take risks and do things that other nations are not willing to do. For example, the Dutch are currently working on a project to build the largest cruise ship in the world. The Dutch are also willing to take risks and do things that other nations are not willing to do. For example, the Dutch are currently working on a project to build the largest cruise ship in the world. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.